He bought the house for peace, a place where family could gather, where children could play without fear. But instead of safety, his own yard became a battleground. Again and again, a man in uniform climbed his fence, as if his property, his dignity, and even his skin didn't matter. It wasn't a burglar, and it wasn't a mistake. It was someone who claimed to protect the community, but treated him like he didn't belong in it. How many times can a man be violated before he finally fights back? But what he chose to do next would change everything. Dorian Price wasn't looking for trouble when he moved into his new home. He was looking for peace. After years of long shifts and saving every spare dollar, this house in Phoenix was supposed to be his reward. A quiet backyard, weekends grilling with family, and evenings where his nephews could run free without a care. For a while, it felt like a dream finally earned. The sun-soaked yard, the sturdy fence, the laughter of kids. That was the life he had worked so hard for. But slowly, something started to eat away at that peace. Footsteps, where they didn't belong. A shadow crossing the fence line that wasn't invited. What seemed like a small intrusion at first would grow into something far more dangerous, testing not only Dorian's patience, but his very sense of dignity. He thought he was building a safe haven. Instead, it was about to become the stage for a fight he never wanted, and the next time it happened, he realized this wasn't going away on its own. He'd lived in this neighborhood for years. He knew the sound of the gates creaking open, the way the gravel crunched under footsteps, the warmth of neighbors waving as they passed. But that morning was different. The quiet didn't feel safe. It felt watched. It started with a knock. Not a polite knock, but the kind that rattles. The frame sharp and demanding. He opened the door, and standing there wasn't a friendly face, but a man in uniform. Stern eyes, clenched jaw, hand resting just a little too heavy on his belt. "Your fence is too high," the man said flatly, glancing past him into the yard. Agee frowned. Too high. The fence had been there long before him, before most of the houses around. It was sturdy, neat, and well within the rules. Still, the man's tone wasn't asking. It was accusing. At first, he tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But it didn't end there. Days later, he caught the same man, climbing over the fence, stepping into his yard like it was public property. No knock, no permission. Just boots on the grass and eyes scanning every corner of his land. Each time the visits grew bolder. Sometimes it was questions about his tools, other times about guests who came by. Always with the same undertone. "You don't belong here." And no matter how calmly he answered, no matter how clearly he explained, the man wasn't listening. He wasn't checking rules. He was checking him. Neighbors started whispering, too. One afternoon, as he walked to his mailbox, he heard it. "Who does he think he is, fencing himself in like that? He's hiding something, you know." The words weren't shouted, but they cut just as deep. He realized it wasn't the fence they hated. It was him, the man behind it. Then came the night that changed everything. He was sitting on his porch, the sun dipping low, when he heard the gate rattle. At first he thought it was the wind. But then the sound came again, metal against metal, deliberate. He leaned forward, heart pounding, and there he was, the same man, scaling the fence like it wasn't even there. For a second their eyes met, cold, unflinching. And in that look was no respect, no restraint, just the message he'd been sending all along. Your home is not yours. He stood up, fists tightening at his sides. "Get off my property," he said, voice shaking, not with fear, but with the anger of someone who had swallowed too much for too long. The man smirked. "If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind me looking." That was it, the line that burned through every ounce of patience he had left. This wasn't about fences. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. About reminding him, day after day, that in their eyes, he was less. And in that moment, he realized no amount of explaining, no amount of politeness was ever going to stop it. This was the kind of fight that demanded a stand. He sat back down on that porch, staring, at the gate, heart still hammering. And for the first time, he thought, what if I stop waiting for him to change and make sure he never crosses that line again? Because there comes a point when a man has nothing left to lose but his dignity. And once that's threatened, even the quietest man can become unstoppable. What he did next wasn't just about protecting a fence. It was about reclaiming his freedom. And it would leave the entire neighborhood stunned. The knock at the door wasn't gentle this time. It was a pounding, hard enough to shake the frame. He didn't even have time to answer before the door swung open and the patrolman stepped in, boots heavy against the floor. No warrant, no permission. Just entitlement wrapped in a uniform. "Step outside," the officer barked, hand hovering dangerously close to his belt. His family froze. His daughter clutched her teddy bear, eyes wide, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the fear. His wife tried to speak, tried to reason, but the words died under the weight of that cold, unblinking stare. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. "This is my home," he said, voice shaking but steady. "I live here. You don't belong inside." But the officer didn't care. He looked around the living room like it was already his crime scene. Every second dragged like an hour. The silence between words was heavier than the commands themselves. Then it happened. Fast, too fast. The officer grabbed his arm, twisting, hard, shoving him against the wall. Pain shot through his shoulder as his daughter screamed. His wife tried to pull the man back, but was shoved aside like nothing. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the humiliation. The message was clear. In this neighborhood, in this skin, even inside your own home, you have no rights. Phones came out. Neighbors gathered outside the window, watching, recording. Some whispered, some turned away. But no one stepped in. He wasn't just fighting one man, he was fighting the silence of everyone who thought maybe he deserved it. His breath came ragged, his vision blurred, not from tears, but from rage boiling behind his eyes. He wanted to fight back, to shove the man away, to scream until the world listened. But one wrong move could cost him his life. The officer leaned close, voice low, venom dripping from every word. "Men like you don't last long here." It was a threat, not just to him, but to every black man who ever dared to own, to stand, to exist without permission. And then, sirens. More cruisers pulling up, lights flashing red and blue across the yard. His heart sank. Reinforcements, not rescue. He thought of his daughter's eyes, wide and trembling. He thought of the generations before him who had been beaten down by the same system. And in that moment, pressed against his own wall, he realized this was bigger than survival. This was about drawing a line. Would he break under the weight of their power? Or would he make this moment the one where silence ended? And, as the flashing lights painted his home in chaos, he understood. Whatever happened next would not just define his story. It would define what the world chose to see when faced with the truth. He stood there, heart still racing, as the officer finally lowered his voice and walked away, leaving behind silence heavier than any words. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the sound of footsteps retreating as if nothing had happened. But for him, everything had changed. That night he sat in his living room, lights dim, staring at his own reflection in the window. He had always believed that if he worked hard, stayed respectful, and followed the rules, he would be safe. But the truth hit harder than any blow. No matter what he did, the color of his skin would always make him a suspect in someone else's eyes. The incident became more than just a personal wound. It was a mirror of a deeper, uglier reality that too many live with every single day. Fear of being stopped for simply walking home, anxiety when a police car pulls up behind you, the humiliation of being treated like you don't belong in a place you've built your whole life around. And yet, he realized something else. As the story spread, through whispers in his neighborhood, through videos online, through conversations that refused to stay silent, he wasn't standing alone anymore. His pain became part of a larger voice, a voice that demanded to be heard, because this was never just about one man's fence, one man's yard, or one man's dignity. It was about generations of injustice. It was about the question every parent of color fears when they send their child out the door. Will they come back home safe? The scars of that night never faded, but they became fuel. Fuel for change, fuel for speaking up, fuel for refusing to let silence be the final answer. He couldn't undo what happened, but he could make sure it wasn't forgotten. And now, the question doesn't rest on him alone. It rests on us. How many more lives must be shaken? How many more moments must be recorded before the world chooses justice over prejudice? Before dignity is no longer something to be fought for, but something every human being is granted by right? The story may have ended that night, but the impact echoes far beyond it. In every community, in every conversation, in every choice to stand up or to look away. So ask yourself, when the next story is written, will you be one of the voices that stayed silent, or one of the voices that finally said, enough?